Okay, welcome back to our discussion about how to support math teaching and learning for our English language learners. And so we started out by talking about language, and then we moved on to the implications of culture for mathematics. And now, for our last week, we are in the pedagogy of math. So, right before this, you listened to a short interview with someone who actually, for many years in her career, was a specialist in teaching sheltered mathematics for English language learners, Christina Smith. So I wanted to add a few ideas. Well, she brought up some of them, but I want to underscore them. And I would really kind of want to emphasize what it is that we know about really successful math instruction for English language learners. And many of these ideas have already come up in small ways. Some of you have actually suggested some of these as possibilities in your discussion posts, or they've already come up in your textbook readings or in other things. But I just want to kind of pull it all together and make sure that you're walking away with the best tools you can in your pedagogical toolkit to work with English language learners in mathematics. So the first thing I want to hit, and I think it's already come up in different ways, is one of the most important things that you need to do for your English language learners in the classroom is lots and lots and lots of math talk. So talking around mathematics, it needs to be it needs to fill the room. It needs to fill your math time. There needs to be lots and lots of discussion. How should the discussion start? The discussion should start by presenting some ideas or maybe a problem that exists that math can solve, presenting it in everyday language, the language of the students, and present that to them and get them thinking about what does it mean to them. This will do a few things. It will help students see what really is at stake here. What are we really talking about? And how does this piece of math connect with the real world? It also opens up the possibility that students can reflect on almost immediately how they or their family or their community connect with this particular problem or with this particular mathematical strategy, that kind of thing. So lots and lots of math talk. Don't apply the terms right away. Hold off on that. And then when students are talking with each other, even if as they're talking with each other, it's not the way you would say it, what research seems to support is not interrupting, letting them talk together in the way that makes sense to them. It may not make sense to you how they're making sense of the math. So just kind of letting that go. And as that math talk is happening, also supporting it in almost three-dimensional ways in your classroom. Here's an example. I was at Stevens Elementary on Friday afternoon, this past Friday afternoon, and I was in a first grade classroom, and the teacher was doing math with the students. And at a certain point, what she did was she said to the students, "Okay, everyone, I want you to go to the perimeter of the carpet." Now, these are first graders, and I'm quite sure almost all the students in the class were English language learners. I'm quite certain that this was a very important strategy in our classroom of, as soon as possible, taking mathematic vocabulary and building it into just the talk that she has with the students. Another thing I noticed was the desks were put into groups of 4. That's pretty typical. And often what happens in that kind of thing is you'll have a string hanging from the ceiling with a number, 1, 2, 3, that kind of thing. And she must be getting ready to teach or just finish teaching money, because there was a giant dime above one of the groups of desks. There was a giant penny above another. And it made me realize, I bet she switches that out. And I bet when the kids are ready to talk about greater than, less than, equal, that kind of thing, I bet that those kinds of symbols show up there as well. So it's a wonderful example of bring it alive. Bring it alive for students. And maybe your exit tasks are around math and bringing that math vocabulary alive. But anyways, just a really great three-dimensional kind of example of lots and lots of math talk. Do you eventually use that vocabulary, the math vocabulary? I had suggested that you hold it off. Absolutely. And just like that teacher, once it's on the table, use it, use it, use it. Because we know for everyone, all of us need to hear words and see words and understand words in multiple contexts before they really take on meaning. I think it's safe to believe that English language learners usually need that a few more times. So that's a way to kind of boost learning in their favor, is to, once you've begun to use those math terms, using them as often as you can. Another strategy that you should really think about using in your classroom is to be really sensitive to the vocabulary that are coming up with a new unit. For example, we've talked with around the discipline of math, we've talked about how there are many, many words that have a math meaning that students, when they walk into class, they very likely already know the BICS meaning as well. So look ahead, be aware, and introduce those to students ahead of time. If a T-chart, right, like this, is a common way that you kind of talk with your students, that might be a great way to go. And maybe at the beginning of every unit, that's just what happens. You're putting up a T-chart, and students know that they're going to see some vocabulary they probably already have a meaning for, and now you're going to introduce a new math meaning of that vocabulary for them. And this won't happen until later grades, but as I mentioned in an earlier lecture, often there are vocabulary in math that have different meanings between different kinds of math. And so that would be something for you if you're teaching at the secondary level that you'd want to be sensitive to as well. Also, again, around vocabulary, being really sensitive to the multiple ways to express something in math. So if you're starting a new unit, being really sensitive to all the different ways, and if you don't know off the top of your head, maybe just by looking through your worksheets and your teacher materials, you'll see how many different ways the same idea can be expressed using different vocabulary around that operation that you're teaching. And then teach that. Make sure students have access to that. Some other ways to support, remember those are called collocations. Those are related words. They don't necessarily mean the same thing, but they tend to come up in the same kinds of environments. Another way you can support collocations, besides introducing them to students and making sure they understand them, is to have some environmental print in your classroom that captures those. Maybe students know that when they look up at the front of the classroom at the big red board, that's where they'll see all the collocations that they need for the math that's happening right now. And maybe every month or every week that gets switched out and you move on to the new collocation. So environmental print is a great way to support that. Another thing that I strongly recommend that you do, and Christina Smith kind of quickly mentioned this, is around what are called sentence stems or sentence starters. Basically, it's the functional language that comes up in the math unit. And so it's a sentence with the pieces there. They simply have to add in. An example might be something like blank times blank equals blank, right? So it's a useful piece of functional language the student can use over and over again in the weeks that multiplication is being taught. But who would have thought that the word times would come up in multiplication. That's a great example. A student walks in knowing what the word time means. Maybe they even have a secondary meaning for times, meaning kind of epics in the past. But now here's a new meaning. And so giving students those sentence starters or sentence stems is a fantastic way to support and scaffold their speaking when they're talking with you or with the class or with the partner around math. Some things you can do with those: you could make kind of a placemat and laminate it, and that goes on the student's desk while it's during math time. You could make a booklet out of them. You could, for example, and we saw a video that did this. You could take a folder, and on one side, so it stands up, and on one side, what you have is those sentence starters that they need right now for this particular part. So when they're talking with their partner, they have the reference right there. And in fact, they could even put it between them and their partner, and then they're maintaining eye contact. So those are all great ways to go around supporting those. Some other things that I really want to underscore, and I've mentioned this before around culture, and that is that we're in kind of a lovely stage around math right now in terms of asking, what are the ways that you can think to solve this? Or did you solve this in a different way? Or how did you solve this? That kind of thing. By being open to multiple ways of doing something, right there, we've increased the chances that a student's individual way of solving a math problem, his family's way of doing that, his community's way of doing that, is more likely to connect to what's happening. So do that. You would be told to, you'd be supported with it anyways if you're in K-12, but just keep in mind that is a really powerful thing to do for your English language learners. And whenever possible, learn about the math backgrounds of your students. Whether they're native English speakers or not. Find out, how do their families use mathematics? What kinds of problems do they solve? And what kinds of math operations do they use? And so you'll be more likely to figure out how your students' daily lives connect with the math curriculum that you're teaching. Another thing to be really sensitive to and to be ready to teach is to look ahead at math worksheets that have lots of BICS reference. We've looked at some with, say, basketball references, sports, that kind of thing. Being really sensitive to the very thing that'll support native English speakers who have access to mainstream U.S. culture may baffle, confuse, and lose your English language learners. So something to think about. So be really sensitive to those. That should be part of your teaching practice. If you can, switch them out. Change to some BICS references students do know. You can always teach some BICS language through those. It's up to you, but what isn't up to you is that is not helping your students access that and getting lost. And the final thing I want to talk about, another aspect of really powerful pedagogy with math for English language learners, is being really sensitive to the grammar that's used in the math unit that you're about to teach. So having a sense, are prepositions really important, and how are they used? And is using one preposition, do I get a different answer than using a different one? Being really sensitive to how the language works, and that could feed some of those sentence stems or sentence starters that you're creating. Making sure that you are, if need be, pulling aside your English language learners and maybe giving a little bit of a grammar lesson, which might surprise you, around math, to make sure that they're ready to tackle that language and they have a sense of how using this preposition, for example, could get this answer, but this preposition would be a completely different answer. Okay, so I think a lot of my ideas really matched up with what Christina was suggesting, but I just wanted to make sure you walk away from this unit around math with the most powerful strategies you can. Okay, so I will see you in the discussion after you take a look at some readings and videos I have waiting for you. See you then.